That night shift, Ethan adjusted the collar of his uniform and stared at the row of security monitors in front of him. His new job as a night shift guard in the high-tech, glossy building had seemed simple enough. Watch the cameras, do a few rounds, and get paid. But something about being in the place alone, especially at night, unsettled him. The building, a towering structure of glass and steel, housed a bunch of cutting-edge tech companies. By day, it was buzzing with activity, people coming in and out, phones ringing, the sounds of footsteps echoing in the shiny halls. But at night, it was dead quiet, almost unnaturally so. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound that kept him company most nights. On his second shift, Ethan noticed something weird. It started small, a flicker on one of the screens. The camera feed from the 11th floor hallway glitched for a second, and for a moment, the hallway looked different. Narrower, maybe, or like the walls were closing in. The colors were wrong too. Everything looked a little defaded, like an old black and white film with a faint touch of color. He leaned closer, squinting at the screen, but it was back to normal before he could get a good look. He shook it off. Tech glitches happen all the time in buildings like this, especially with the miles of wiring and fancy surveillance systems. No big deal. But it didn't stop there. As the nights passed, the glitches got stranger. Sometimes, entire rooms disappeared from the feed, replaced by static or shadowy blurs. Other times, the cameras would show people walking through hallways that should have been empty. Ethan would rewind the footage, but there'd be no sign of anyone there. The first few times, he thought maybe someone was working late, but when he checked, the offices were locked up and dark. Then, on the fifth night, something really weird happened. Ethan was making his rounds, flashlight in hand, walking past the hallway on the 11th floor where he'd seen the first glitch. Everything looked normal to clean. White walls, the faint hum of air conditioning, the shiny floors reflecting the overhead lights. But as he passed one of the doors, he felt it a cold draft. Though there were no windows nearby and no vents along that part of the corridor, he stopped, his skin prickling. His flashlight flickered, just for a second. He tried to ignore the creeping sense that something wasn't right, but curiosity got the better of him. He doubled back and checked the room where the draft seemed to come from. The door had no number, no company logo, nothing. Ethan frowned. He had memorized the layout of the building pretty well by now, and he was sure that there hadn't been a door here the last time he patrolled this floor. He hesitated, then reached for the handle. Locked. He swiped his keycard. Nothing. The door didn't budge. Annoyed, he stepped back and aimed his flashlight at the small window in the door, trying to see inside. The glass was frosted, but he thought he could make out a shape inside, something moving, just barely. It wasn't clear enough to tell what it was, but his heart sped up. Someone had to be in there, someone who wasn't supposed to be. Ethan rushed back to the security office to check the camera feed again. But when he pulled up the 11th floor hallway, the screen was blank. No static, no glitching, just black. Like the camera wasn't even there. His stomach tightened, and he grabbed the walkie to radio his supervisor, but then stopped. What could he even say? That there was a random door where there hadn't been one before, and now the camera was out. He could already hear how stupid it would sound. Instead, he decided to check it out himself. He grabbed his flashlight and hurried back up to the 11th floor. But when he got there, the hallway was just like before, except the door was gone. The whole stretch of wall was smooth, like it had always been that way. Ethan blinked, trying to wrap his head around it. He knew that door had been there. He had felt the handle, tried his keycard. He stood frozen in the hallway, breathing heavily, the flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Suddenly, he heard footsteps echoing from behind him. He spun around, but the hallway was empty. Hello? His voice wavered, and he instantly regretted saying anything. No response. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they sounded like they were right behind him. He whipped his head around again. Nothing. He backed up toward the elevator, his heart pounding now. As he reached for the button, the lights overhead flickered, then shut off completely, plunging the hallway into darkness. And in the darkness, he heard breathing, not his own, but something else. Something close. Ethan's hands fumbled for his flashlight switch, but before he could click it, the lights flickered back on. The hallway was empty. Breathing heavily, he turned and practically sprinted back to the security office. Once inside, he locked the door and sank into the chair, staring at the monitors. The feeds were all back to normal. Every floor, every hallway, nothing was out of place. But he knew what he had seen or hadn't seen. Something was off about this building, and he wasn't going crazy. He wasn't. As the hours dragged on toward dawn, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening in the building wasn't just a glitch. And it wasn't over.